Thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. Today's news brings us yet further support for the contention that you can get a heck of a lot more information about our federal government now by watching what they do rather than by listening to what they say. It is always, always, always true every single day that this administration is in place, but maybe never more so than today. In today's news, a new example. Regardless of anything the president said or says from here on out, we now know from watching what they do that what will go down in history books about this time in American history is that 4 days after the worst terrorist attack ever against Latinos in the United States, and on the actual day, the president was in El Paso, the site of the massacre, supposedly comforting that city that had just had 22 innocent people gunned down in cold blood because the gunman said he wanted to stop a Hispanic invasion of immigrants and save the white race from a Hispanic immigration invasion. On the day the president did make his trip to El Paso, he did say words, and the Trump White House said more words about what that visit meant and why the president went there and how it should make us think or feel about the president's reaction to that crime. Yes, there were plenty of words. If you ignore them, though, which I strongly suggest you make a habit of doing, if you look instead at what they did, we now know what they did in response to that massacre is that the president's campaign affirmed that, in fact, they're still going to leave up their millions of dollars worth of Facebook ads that rail about an invasion of immigrants at the border, just like the El Paso shooter's diatribe said. That's one thing they did in response. Yeah, we're going to leave up those ads, that rhetoric that the campaign shooter quoted as his justification for killing those 22 people. And in addition to that, we now know that regardless of whatever they said, whatever the administration wanted us to think about what they did in the wake of that massacre, what they actually did in the wake of that massacre, what we can see now that they did, is that they chose the moment when the president would be visiting El Paso in response to this anti-Hispanic, anti-immigrant terrorist attack there. The Trump administration chose that moment to do something, to not just say something, to do something. They chose that moment to launch the biggest anti-immigrant raid in U.S. history, descending in force on meat processing plants in Mississippi and arresting nearly 700 men and women without warning, leaving, among other things, the kids of those people who they arrested in school or at daycare or at home or wandering in the streets with no idea what to do or where to go, with their parents suddenly taken away. Little kids were put up in a community center in Forest, Mississippi, when that town realized what had happened, and they turned their community center into a makeshift emergency shelter for these kids from their town who suddenly had no parents. A local 24-hour gym turned itself into a shelter as well, when nobody else knew what to do. And people in that community came forward to the gym to donate food for the kids so that at least while they were holed up in the 24-hour gym in town, they could have dinner. The only reason they had that place to go is because the owner of the gym decided he would let them stay there for a while.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement handcuffed hundreds of immigrant workers and loaded them onto buses as co-workers and family members watched in disbelief.
Por favor,
please, can I just see my mother?
Please.
Kids left not knowing where their parents were being taken. This 11-year-old says her father was among those detained.
I need my dad, mommy.
Jordan Barnes opened up his gym to children with nowhere to go.
The kids should be the main priority. If we all put the kids first and do what we can to help them to make this as less painful as possible for them.
Tonight, this woman tells us her husband is among those still detained. She says she's been in the U.S. for 24 years. This church, now a sanctuary for those in limbo, like this 1-year-old girl. The priest here tells us her mother is in custody. He's taking care of the baby as her father tries to find his wife.
That's Gabe Gutierrez reporting tonight for NBC Nightly News. After these mass raids that were launched yesterday while the president was in El Paso, these mass arrests, the Trump administration eventually released a few hundred of the people they had arrested and taken away, which of course raises the question as to whether they had any idea who they were arresting in the first place, why they swooped in and arrested those particular people in the first place, particularly when it's evident they had zero plan for what would happen to those people's families, their homes, even their babies and their little kids. But again, regardless of whatever they say and whatever comes out of the president's mouth, this is the story of how our government responded to an anti-immigrant massacre committed by someone who quoted the words of the president's re-election campaign about needing to stop an immigrant invasion. Our government's response to that, the Trump administration's response to that mass killing, was to leave up the president's re-election campaign ads that decry an immigrant invasion, and the administration mounted their biggest show of force yet against immigrants, including literally leaving kids crying in parking lots looking for their parents, because the Trump administration just wanted to make a big show of taking their parents away, whether or not they even wanted to keep them. So that is how this will look in history. I don't know that anything said by this administration or spoken by this president will ultimately make it into this generation's almanac of what happened in our country in our time. But the government and the president's campaign responding like this to this terrorist attack against Latinos and immigrants, this will make the history books. The administration responding with the biggest ever anti-immigrant raid to the first ever anti-Latino, anti-immigrant gun massacre in this country, this will be history. This will go down in history as what our government did. And of course, whatever we are all doing right now as citizens in our own lives will also be our own personal history of what it was that we were doing at this time in our country's life, when our country was doing this. It's absolutely astonishing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.